How many buildings have you designed over the course of your career?
40 or 50 buildings, major high-rise buildings.
Before you were a world-renowned architect, you were just someone who took a chance on yourself and decided, I'm going to bet on myself and do something that I love to do. And who knows if it'll work, but I'm going to go for it. I'm going to pour everything I have into this company, which is now FXCollaborative. So Dan, thanks for being here.
It's great to be here, and I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
I can't even imagine, like, if you didn't go into architecture, we'd have a very different city.
Yeah, that's it. I never thought of it that way.
Before we go any further, you must understand the magnitude of the man that I'm sitting across from. His name is Dan Kaplan, and he rarely, if ever, gives an interview. Dan is a founding partner of FXCollaborative, the architectural firm that has designed buildings all over the world, most notably in New York City. If you've ever been to Times Square, Penn Station, Hudson Yards, or even the Bronx Zoo, you've been witness to Dan's work. Today I sit down with Dan on the top floor of his latest masterpiece, 1 Willoughby Sq. It's the tallest office building in Brooklyn. Join me for a special conversation with the extraordinary architect, Dan Kaplan. The entrepreneurial spirit is the cornerstone to the American dream, a beacon to all willing to weave their story into the fabric of our history. I'm Elliot Dweck, and this is From the Founder. I want to start with your childhood. We want to talk about your life growing up and what your family life was like.
My mom, who was a big influence on me, was an artist and a designer. She grew up in Chicago and always was a bit of a misfit, and at a young age really wanted to be an architect. And she wound up being the first woman to get into the industrial design program at the Chicago Art Institute. And during her studies, she said, well, maybe I want to be an architect. But she then, had a bunch of kids, but it always worked and basically became an interior designer and had an interior design practice that she worked out of the house with like 3 or 4 people as employees. But it was cool for me as a kid to watch someone do work and like talk about. I used to go with her to sites and into the D&D building and really understand. Just from a very, like when you talk about the founder, like I got to watch firsthand a founder. Unfortunately, she passed away very young from cancer, but I still was, she was still alive when I went to architecture school, and I was like, oh, my 3 older brothers were docs. I want to be an architect.
It's interesting because your dad being a doctor and your 3 older brothers becoming doctors, and they all followed him. Did you ever think about what made you say, like, the medical field's not for me?
I think it was my just innate contrarian, like, oh, they're doing that, I'm not doing that.
Right.
Yeah. And also, I think I just gravitated to the arts and to design and just always loved it. And my high school chemistry teacher was a woman named Judy Fox, and her husband was Bob Fox, who started Fox and Fowle. And I said, hey, I hear your husband's an architect. Can I go and speak to him? And so she said, sure. So I took the train, and I grew up on Long Island. I took the train, and I said, hey, I'm interested in being an architect. Can I work for you? I had no idea. I was like 16 years old. And he goes, that's not probably a good idea, but here's a brochure. You should really go to, Cornell has this summer program for architects. And I was like, cool.
Were you one of the best?
Yeah, so I had a real aptitude. I was like, oh yeah, I love doing this. And
do you think it's because of your mom?
Yeah, I think so, because she had a drafting table. And so I was always...
When did you first realize that you loved it?
My mom used to get, Architectural Digest, interior design, and I would spend hours like poring over these magazines and realizing that there was a whole world of design.
Right. So what did it feel like when you found your passion and you didn't only find that you found all of these people around you, this community?
Yeah. It felt really great. And I went back, finished up my senior year in high school. And at this point then, Bob Fox and Bruce Fowle were partners, and they were moving into an office. And I was like, well, they're like, you could be the office boy. So I left high school early and just became the office boy for them.
Did you have in the back of your head that you were going to eventually do what you've done in your career? And
No,
what
it was clear.
capacity?
Then I applied to architecture school. And I applied to the 5-year program at Cornell and a 5-year program at Syracuse. And at Cornell, I got in. I'm like, okay, I'm going. You know, it was sort of like, sounds good. Now you're dealing with 60 people who've self-selected that they want to study architecture intensively for 5 years. You're 18 years old, you're full of adrenaline and energy, and it's competitive and it's camaraderie and it's everything. We were also really blessed by having this amazing professor from Switzerland named Toby Stokely, who's still alive. And he brought a whole European humanist approach to architecture. So all through architecture school, like the ambition was, as soon as you could, you go work in Europe.
Right.
And you go look at all the great modernist architecture and you absorb. And we spent a studio in Florence, like many architects do, and they give you a sketchbook and you go to this Michelangelo chapel for a week and draw everything by hand, and you really start to observe.
You went to live and work in Switzerland.
Yes, exactly. So professors from Switzerland would come to Ithaca. Professors from Ithaca would come there, they'd teach. And so there was a professor in one of these things that I met. He goes, when you're done, come look me up. I wrote him a letter and he goes, why don't you stop by? I'll be in the office between, after September 1st. So, then I just showed up at his doorstep and he goes, you can start next week and we'll be ready for you. And I was like, that's it? He goes, yeah, that's it.
So you just walked into his office and he said, all right, you started next week.
Yes. And so basically, a lot of the architects there did that because they got these energetic young American kids who were really into it, could really draw. And architecture firms work on that sort of energy of the young and so forth. And it was just an awesome experience. I spent about a year doing it. It was really fun. I probably should have stayed there longer, but then I came back to New York. I was always fascinated with the city, and it was sort of mid-'80s, and New York was really on sort of an upswing. It felt like that was the center of where a lot of design was happening.
How did you know this?
There was all these New York firms really hitting their stride in the 80s in New York. And so I came, and I think it was a very lucky thing. I applied to Todd Williams and Billy Sen. They're actually doing the Obama Library now.
Really?
And everybody wanted to work for them. So I walked in and they were like, and the receptionist was like, oh God, here's another one,
Right.
And I think it was I didn't get the job, and I was like, okay, I'll go to the next one. And you sort of pound the pavement, and somebody said, hey, there's this firm called SIris Coombs on the Upper West Side, and they're looking for somebody, and they're really interesting. It's a husband and wife. And so I was like, great. So, I went in, they were like, oh yeah, you'd be perfect for us. They were looking for somebody who was good timing. And they did high-end apartment renovations. And I really lucked out in that they got this great commission, renovate a whole floor on Park Avenue for a young fashion designer named Vera Wang.
Vera Wang, the little rich girl who grew into a big girl with a dream job.
She was just really starting out. She worked at Vogue. It was like a 6,000 square foot apartment, one whole floor. I was the project architect, so I worked directly with her. I always tell people in my office who work for me, if you can design a bathroom for somebody like Vera Wang, you can design a core of an office building like we're sitting in.
How did you get to become project manager?
Well, it was great because it was a small firm. The associate who would probably have been the one to do it had just left. And they were like, well, Dan could do it.
How did her bathroom look in the end?
It looked great. It was really awesome. I called up Bob Fox. I'm like, hey.
What made you call him up?
The reason I called him up, they had really taken off. Bob Fox and Bruce Fowler, Fox and Fowler, was 80s architects, and they really, really had taken off. And they were on a roll. They were 60 going to 100, and they were hiring like crazy. And I was like, great, sounds good. So between 87 and 91, I was working there, and I was working on some great projects and doing a lot of good stuff. And then what happened is Bob and Bruce got this great project. I became the project designer. I was the project designer and then became the project architect, and really saw this thing through. It was a 500,000 square foot corporate headquarters office building. Had every element that you need for a monumental office building. It had a a stone base, a curtain wall. It had a very complex winter garden.
This was like a big moment for you.
It was a huge moment. It was great. But what it really allowed me to do is look at something from the beginning to the end. You know, we started out I remember doing the yellow sketches, yellow tracing paper sketches, starting, you know, the 3 different parties or arrangements on the site, all the way to the very end of the project.
So what was the next step after that?
So then what wonderful thing happened was, we were coming out of the recession of the 90s, and New York really hit a great stride. And Douglas Durst called up Bob and Bruce and said, hey, I have a great project and you guys would be perfect for it. And it turned out it was 4 Times Square. And
4 Times Square was huge.
4 Times Square was unbelievable. It also was a real solid introduction into the whole, not introduction, exploration and groundbreaking into the green building movement and the sustainability movement. It really, before you hear LEED buildings out, it was really invented in a large degree at 4 Times Square with a lot of people involved. So then the 2 partners stopped getting along, Bob Fox and Bruce Fowle. They split up and I became a founding partner of FXCollaborative, or FX Fowle at the time, but FXCollaborative. But
So you founded your own company?
With Bruce.
With Bruce.
And the other partner said, Dan, you need to be the senior partner with Bruce.
And you guys don't just design buildings, you create communities.
Correct. And what I really think, we're sort of quiet about it, but what I think is really cool, I think about the great New York institutions and what FXCollaborative has had the impact on. I think of the Bronx Zoo, Center for Global Conservation, Lincoln Center, Times Square, the New York Times building, Fifth Avenue, Penn Station, Hudson Yards, downtown Brooklyn. You know,
I can't even imagine, like, if you didn't go into architecture, we'd have a very different city.
Yeah, that's it. I never thought of it that way.
Do you look at the city and you just say, what would I want to change?
Yeah, but I love the city, so I also go walk around and I have a deep appreciation for architectural history.
You get that call from someone and they say, we want you to design this building. How is it still exciting each time? Yeah. You know, your 10th office building or your...
So what I love about this profession is that it's always different. It's always different. Every project is different. We worked for the state of New York, the city of New York, the railroad, the community board to establish all of the designs for Hudson Yards.
You guys made the guidelines for Hudson Yards?
In terms of where the buildings are, how the network works, how it's decked over and so forth, over the rail yards. That was us.
How does it feel to be on the 33rd floor of this building of 1 Willoughby Square that a few years ago was nothing?
It's just awesome. I mean, that part's really deeply satisfying.
What was the vision for this building?
So this building, it's the first new office building in a generation in downtown Brooklyn. It's the tallest office building in Brooklyn. What is the ethos of the place I come back? What is the DNA of Brooklyn, and why do people want to be here? And it's all about creativity, and it's all about the creative class and thinking a little differently. And what's unusual about where we're sitting is that there's light on 4 sides. You don't get that in an office building. Usually there's an office building is a floor, and in the middle of the floor is all the elevators, all the toilets.
Here it's just open.
It's all a platform for collaboration.
You're not just saying that, like you put your money where your mouth is. You took 3 floors in this building.
Exactly.
Can we go take a look at your office?
Let's do it.
Let's do it.
It's good. And so what we wanted to do was create a modern industrial loft. The top 2 floors are really where the big collaborative spaces are. So they're wide open, filled with architects and so forth.
So we're out here on the terrace.
Yes, this is it.
So that's where your grill's gonna go.
Yeah, the grill's gonna go over there.
Okay.
But more importantly,
the meetings.
We're gonna have meetings, a place for someone to come out and
maybe some parties.
Yes, maybe.
Some company gatherings.
If you're an architect, you know, and have a firm and you're working on the city, to be able to sit out and look out on the city is an important.
Right, you want to be able to see it.
Thank you. Cool. Really enjoyed it. It's really great.